So now we're left with one place in all of Christ's ministry where he used a word that actually can mean hell, Hades, the hell of the Greek, with reference to people. Well, almost people. And that's the one, Capernaum shall be brought down to hell. But what does that mean? Does it mean the whole city is going to be like lifted off of the countryside and dropped into a pit of fire? No, that can't be, because the original buildings are still there. They're still there. It's right on the north shore of Lake Galilee. And original buildings are still there. They've excavated a synagogue, which they know is a newer synagogue built around 300 or 400 AD, on top of an older synagogue. The foundation of that is the first synagogue that was there. And that is the one that Jesus Christ taught in. Christ's feet stood on that floor in that synagogue. And they've excavated other buildings. So the buildings are still there. They're not in some place of fire. Well, then he meant the people, right? But I put down here some of the problems involved with that. Are we to think that Jesus meant the physical buildings of Capernaum? Well, hardly. They're still there. Are we to think that Jesus meant the people of Capernaum? Well, probably so. But if this is a place of torture, then, did he mean the physical buildings and the people would go to hell? When was Capernaum brought down to hell? When did this happen? Seeing that now there's nobody there, are all the people of Capernaum now in this place of hell? Were the children and infants included in this trip to the Greek hell? He didn't say just the evil men, or just the evil men and the hookers or something, the harlots. No, he said Capernaum. As a city, Capernaum shall be brought down to hell. But if hell is a place of torture and fire, then everybody there had to go there. Of course, theologians are quick to say, oh no, children don't go to hell. Why not? Well, because they haven't reached the age of responsibility. What is the age of responsibility? No one knows. Okay, but when you have a city, of course this was a small city, but let's take a big city like New York. And if Christ were to say New York's coming down to hell, that means you have children in that city that are literally spaced 1 minute apart in age. 11.5 million people. You probably got kids that are spaced about 1 minute apart. Some are 13 years old, 4 months, 2 weeks, 5 days, 8 hours, 26 minutes and 14 seconds. And there's another one was born 3 seconds later, than 17 seconds. Is the one that was born 17 seconds as opposed to is he now in the age of responsibility, and the other, is that the dividing line? It's total foolishness. It's unbelievable, ungodly stupidity and foolishness. But they can't even make that claim in this situation. Shall I tell you why? You say, well, he didn't mean the children. Certainly he didn't mean the children. Oh no? Who does he draw analogies with here? Woe unto thee, Chorazin. Woe unto thee, Bethesda. For if the mighty works that were done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. Tyre would not repent at the teaching of Christ. Christ went up to Tyre, and he shook the dust off his feet and left. You know why? He wouldn't repent. Tyre would not repent. But I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon in the day of judgment than for you. How can there be places in hell that are more tolerable than others if hell is being burnt with literal fire? Are those that are more tolerable, is the heat of their fire only 2,000 degrees, but those that are less tolerable, the temperature of fire is 3,000 degrees? What kind of idiocy are we talking about? Now, listen to this. And thou, Capernaum, which are exalted unto heaven, shall be brought down to hell. For if the mighty works which were done in thee had been done in Sodom, Sodom, it would have remained to this day. In other words, God would have forgiven them when they repented at the mighty works. Well, why didn't he do those mighty works then? Well, he didn't feel like it. He thought he'd just let this city pass by the wayside, send them all to hell. Boy, I'll tell you, you got to go some distance till you find a dumber religion than Christianity. I mean Orthodox Christianity. It's about as dumb as it gets. If the mighty works had been done in you, had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. Let me tell you something. When Sodom was destroyed, were all the babies and infants and little boys and girls and children destroyed with it? Yes, they were. You can't use that excuse, oh, he didn't mean the children. He's comparing them to Sodom. When he destroyed Sodom, it was only Lot and his wife that escaped. Not all the little children and infants. They all went down with the fire. So, this is really a form of parable too. At least it's figurative language. Capernaum was a pretty exalted city for its size. It had the most beautiful synagogue anywhere in all Galilee. But it wasn't the largest city. It was small. So anyway, I'll just read some more of these things here. Didn't Jesus say that the day of judgment was yet future? So how could they be brought down to hell now? What happens to these people until the day of judgment? No one lives in Capernaum today. Are they all in hell as we speak? Sodom experienced a similar judgment and destruction. Did the children escape God's wrath in Sodom? No, only Lot's family. Is the judgment of Sodom already past? Where are the Sodomites now? He said it shall be more tolerable for Sodom in the day of judgment. Well, they were already destroyed 2,000 years before. Then Capernaum's children also did not escape the Greek hell, did they? Do theologians believe children are tortured in the Christian hell? No, they don't. But Capernaum, the whole city came down. It was likened to Sodom, and we know the children were all destroyed in that. Did Peter go to the pagan hell as he was a citizen of Capernaum? His house was there. And what about Jesus? Did Jesus consign himself to hell since he lived most of his ministry in Peter's house? He had to conclude himself. Can Tyre and Sidon yet repent if Christ does mighty works in them? He said they would. Well, what about it? Christians would say, no, those people in Tyre are all in hell now. Christ said himself, if the mighty works were preached there, that they would repent. We had the parable, and then we had this thing with Capernaum, which obviously is not talking about a whole city being put into a hell of torture with Satan and demons, for all eternity. Obviously not. Well, then where did Jesus Christ talk about this Christian hell of torture and fire and anguish and pain and for all eternity with the devils and the demons? And where did he talk about that? As a place called hell? Nowhere. Not one scripture. There is no scripture. Not one. Now, I'm going to go into all of the scriptures. I made a list of some of the things that I will go into, because they're going to say, maybe Gehenna isn't properly translated hell, but it is a place where God tortures people in fire for all eternity. No, it isn't. So I will go through all these terms. Fire, salted with fire, furnace of fire, unquenchable fire, baptism of fire, Gehenna fire, everlasting fire, flaming fire, flame of fire, tried with fire, vengeance of eternal fire, tormented with fire, lake of fire, fire and brimstone. God is a consuming fire. Outer darkness, gnashing of teeth, undying worms, judgment, condemnation, damnation, everlasting punishment. And I'm going to cover every one of those words, every one in the whole New Testament. Every one I'm going to cover. And I'm just going to blow them out of the sky, every one of them. So that hopefully when I'm done with this part D, nothing left of the Christian hell. It's gone. It's gone. I've already blown it out of the Old Testament. There is not one phrase, one sentence, one iota of a judgment after death in a place called hell with torment in the Hebrew Scriptures. Not one place. But anyway, just learn a few basic principles like that. There is no everlasting. There's no such word. Christ never spoke of anyone being tortured or punished in a place called hell and all of that. But then we do have to answer these questions. What about better to cut off your arm than to be cast into Gehenna fire? Well, what is the Gehenna fire? Well, it is a judgment for sure, but it's not hell, it's not literal fire, it's not forever, and so on. But on the other hand, I don't want to take away from the severity of the really evil people who will go into judgment. It will be horrible. It will be horrible, for sure. It will be horrible. But God is fair in judgment. Those that are worthy of a few stripes only get a few stripes. Those that are worthy of many, they're going to get many. Of course, the whole idea of judgment, the church has not a clue, not even a clue, as to what the judgments of God are all about. All they know is eternal punishment in hell. That judgment is where you get sentenced to eternal punishment in hell. God judges in righteousness. Mercy shall triumph over judgment, it says. Mercy shall triumph over judgment. How could mercy triumph over judgment if there's never any mercy upon those that go into judgment? Major contradictions there in the Christian teaching. Of course, the only reason we have this teaching is they use it for the same reason all the other countries used it. Fear tactic. Keep the people in line. You know, when the lawyers and intelligentsia of Greece, ancient Greece, went down to Egypt, it's all these gods and all this paraphernalia, the underworld. What is all this stuff? He said, well, this is what we teach the people. They don't fear going to jail for stealing or something. You tell them they're going to burn in hell for all eternity and put the fear in them. So how do you do? Well, we invent all these gods and all this junk about where they go through all these, and all this suffering and all this stuff. But if you're good, then you get to ride on the boat of millions of years with the sun god Ra floating across the ocean of the sky and so on. And so, you read Thayer's paper on everlasting punishment, and you got dozens of historians. They said, wow, what a great idea. What a great idea. We take that back to Greece. They took it back to Greece, and they start teaching all this stuff, and their poets start writing poetry about all these gods of the underworld, and all this stuff. And some of them retain almost the same names. Of course, the one time you find the word in 2 Peter where the angels were changed in hell, the word is Tartarus. Tartarus is not even a Greek word. Tartarus is an Egyptian word. Tartaru was the lowest of the underworld in the Egyptian hell. And now Tartarus is said to be the lowest place of torment in the Greek hell. They just pass it on. And now all the countries of the world have this hell. Where did they get it? They got together one time. I don't know when. 1200 BC, I don't know when it was. There was this great ingathering in Babylon from all around the world. From China, everywhere. Doctors, lawyers, scholars came to Babylon for an exchange of knowledge and information. They were there for years. They had to really learn their languages even to communicate a lot. They were there for years, and they exchanged all their knowledge. Mathematics, medicine, religion. And they went back to their homelands. And that's why virtually every nation of the world has the same beliefs as the ancient Egyptians, which was the first real civilized nation. So it all came from. That's why there's a Chinese hell. They didn't invent it on their own. They got it out of Babylon. Babylon got it from the Egyptians. And that's why these stories are similar all around the world. And they're all a hoax. That's why I start off my paper. The Christian hell is a Christian hoax. The Islam hell is a Muslim hoax. The Jewish hell is a Jewish hoax. The Greek hell is a Greek hoax. The Egyptian hell is an Egyptian hoax. The Hindu hell is a Hindu hoax. The Buddhism hell is a Buddhism hoax. And every other hell of every culture on earth is a man-made hoax. For nearly 6,000 years, the religious and civil leaders of virtually every major nation, culture, religion on earth have used the fear and terror of future hell to keep the dumb sheep obedient to the whims of their leaders. That's my opening statement.
I always thought some man back in Egypt, there had to be one man who came up with the whole idea, the concept of hell. Some guy was sitting there, smoking something and came up with it.
Some of it goes back to whatever chronicles they had before the flood. The first place where they gathered after the flood was Babylon, which is in Mesopotamia, probably near Baghdad. And there they built a tower and all of that. So anybody who was there certainly knew what was contained in the Chronicles that Noah brought through the flood. And he had to bring Chronicles through the flood. Or how did Moses, centuries and centuries later, how did he know to write the book of Genesis or any of this stuff? This is the scroll of the generations of Adam. What scroll? He had a scroll. He wasn't making this up on the top of his head, Moses. He had a scroll. He had genealogies of Adam and his children and all of that. You see, he had that. And certainly he took that through the flood because somehow Moses got a hold of them. Moses had those, or at least copies of them, of those scrolls. Well, anybody who went to Babylon knew what was in these scrolls. So when the Egyptians went to Egypt, they did seem to excel those that stayed back in Mesopotamia, although some try to say Mesopotamia was maybe the earliest. But it seems evident that Egypt had their own written language and everything before Mesopotamia, although there was some exchange of information back and forth. But what I was going to say is some of these pagan teachings, I think, go back to these scrolls. The serpent said, "You shall not surely die." Of course, all humanity and every theologian on earth today virtually still believes that lie. You're an immortal soul. You can't die. So they believed not God, but they believed the serpent. You got a soul. You shall not die. The teaching of a soul started in Egypt. They were the first people to talk about there's something inside of you doesn't die. A lot of their culture, I think, started out around these stories of creation, which they started to get all screwed up. But it was all corrupted. Of course, the Egyptians had a lot of gods, but one of their very first gods was Adam. Where'd they get that? Adam. So rather than worshiping the true God, they worshipped Adam, the first man. So we got worshiping men as gods. And then we have these rulers in Egypt who then thought of themselves as God. Over time, it just all got corrupted. And then, of course, the idea of frightening people into being good, that seemed to work out. And so they He just built, and it got more and more elaborate. I mean, you can see some of the early writings of Egypt. They were not nearly as evolved as they were later on. All of the Horus and Isis and all of these gods, they came centuries and centuries later, but now they're part of Egyptian religion. They're all gods. You've got to go through these gods in the underworld if you're going to be judged righteous. You have two choices. You can ride on the boat of millions of years, as they call it, or you could go to the field of reeds. In the underworld, there was this hell, with all kinds of horrible things that happened. But there's also the fields of reeds. And what it was like a river, reeds and water, similar to the Nile up on the surface of the world. And so when you died, if you were good, you would get a beautiful little farm in the field of reeds, where you could raise your crops, make your beer. They were big on beer, and all of this. And these were called the fields of reeds. Now, what do we find in Hades? Well, they had two compartments. They had this place with all the fire and all the torch and everything else. But what else is found in Hades? The Elysian fields. The Elysian fields, right out of Egypt. And the fields of reeds, they turned it into the Elysian fields, and these were places where you could frolic out in the fields and with plenty of food and all this. It's all pagan, every bit of it.